Welcome back to the Morning Show here on the Rise News. I'm Adesua Omoro.
And I'm so Auntie Gary.
Well, in continuation of the year 2019 in review, we turn our attention this morning to the education sector in Nigeria. While Nigeria is ranked the largest economy in Africa, sadly, it does not hold the credentials of being the country with the best education outcomes on the continent, with its young population registering in large numbers seeking educational opportunities abroad. A situation many analysts blame on mismanagement and underfunding in the annual budget of the sector.
Also, as acknowledged by President Muhammadu Buhari, he says education remains a potent weapon to address the nation's challenges. The president also believes that education is effective in reducing unemployment as well as social vices in the country.
And according to the president, Nigerians are looking up to the academic community to make their contributions to the nation's drive for growth and development of the economy. He concluded that universities offer the best pathway towards breaking out of the shackles of ignorance and poverty. Joining us now from our Abuja studios is public affairs analyst Professor Obasi of the University of Abuja. Welcome, Professor. Happy New Year, I should say to you, Professor. Professor, let's have a rundown of the key points in the course
Thank you very much, and compliment of the season.
Compliment of the season, Professor. Let's have a rundown of the key points,
Thank you.
In the year as regards our educational system, the challenges, and let's talk about ways of reversing these challenges in the new year. The key points this year, Professor.
Thank you. Good morning. I can just in a sentence say that the year 2019 saw a declining priority given to education. That's the way I would say it. Declining priority given to education. In 2016, we had 8% of the budget allocated to education. And in 2017 and 18, 7%, both years. And 2009, we had 6%. So, and going to 2020, which has been presented already and signed by the president, around 5%. So you can see a declining priority given to education from 2016. But let me also add that it seems there are a little bit shift in the emphasis given to universal basic education, which is good. But when you disaggregate that kind of allocation from the mainstream allocation that is analysts will be using and say how many percentage was allocated to education, and also taking into consideration that TED Fund is hugely investing in tertiary education, and these are not easily calculated alongside because you don't know from the word go what the TED Fund budget is, so you can know. So we can just say generally that it appears that it's declining priority given to education, but I think it should be corrected by harmonizing, integrating all these sectorial allocations, sub-sectorial allocations given to education to make analysis very easier.
Indeed, and still talking about the funding of the sector, once again, we have failed to heed the recommendations of UNESCO, which says we should budget about 15 to 20% of our national budget to that sector. The president has said now that the increase in VAT would be used to fund critical sectors such as health, education, and infrastructure. But how do we get creative with funding this sector, Professor? What do you think we can come up with?
Yeah, that's really the point I made. By presenting that overview of our allocation, I underscore the fact, of course, that we are too far away from UNESCO recommendation. We are very far away from the UNESCO recommendation. And there appears not to be any serious attempt towards hitting that UNESCO recommendation. I haven't seen it at the federal level. But in some states, I've said this once in national television, Katsina State, for instance, under Governor Sharma, allocated more than what is required, beyond even UNESCO allocation, to education in the state. So it's not as if some states have not been able to follow UNESCO recommendation. Some have been able to do that. But the extent to which that translated into an improved and highly qualitative education system in a country is a different matter.
Okay, Mr. Obasi, I know you have said that the federal government has a declining priority given to education. However, with previous budgets that have been allocated to the education sector, they still fall below the standards that has been set by even UNESCO themselves. If we're looking at mismanagement of funds, there are other variables that we could also look at that are not money-based. How about some of those problems? We're talking about poor governance, unstable staff, quality of education. If we take away funding as one problem, there are other problems that we face in the education sector. What do you say about this?
Excellent. You're right on that. I only use that overview characterization to understand the trend. And that trend also has implications on some of these other things you are talking about. For instance, if we look at declining quality, poor infrastructural facilities, poor teacher attitude across the pipeline, primary to university level, poor attitude to work, and among other things you listed too, we can say we still have a lot to do. But let me say that Nigerian education system, like the Indian education system, is characterized by a high degree of diversity. We have what you can call the good, the bad, and the ugly. So within our education system itself, you can have some sectorial, sub-sectorial islands of excellence that you can find out. In this country, you have some few federal universities excelling. You have some private universities excelling by all world standards. Never mind, we stay far away from the reputational ranking system of universities in the world. We have a long way to go. But you can see some islands of excellence and good performance, and telling you that some universities indeed are on the right trajectory. At the primary, early stage, primary and basic level, there is indeed a renewed attempt, by what I said, by a huge allocation, I think 112 billion allocated to UBEC. And I know that is going in one way or the other to address the issue of out-of-school children, over 10 million children, you know. So we can say that the problems are there. But what we should be more interested in is what are the systematic measures, interventions planned to achieve them. These are the things the education administrators must challenge themselves with. We should not move on the basis of business as usual. Every system must have a strategy that drives it. Early childhood, primary school, basic, senior secondary, tertiary, and higher education level. We must have. At the higher education level, for instance, the problems are enormous. But I do know that systematically, both government and ASU have done a good analysis in the needs assessments of Nigerian public universities. It is such document that can drive intervention in the higher education system. We need such document to drive the other levels. It's only when you have them on the ground and move systematically over the years to be achieving certain things mapped out that you will see that systematically there is improvement. But if we just move business as usual, do things without proper planning, I don't think we will be able to achieve the expected goals. Even not to assess it, to monitor it, it will become a...
Okay, Mr. Obasi, you did mention that there have been islands of excellence. So there are people that are getting it right in the education sector. And permit me to say that the private sector has been doing a good job. I'll give you an example. I went to a private university, and one of the things I was assured of is when I start at a certain year, in 4 years I would be done. Are there things that we can learn from the private sector? Because there seems to be a disparity between the federal, state, and local government when it comes to the education sector.
Right. If I can just merge this question with it so you can answer both together, Professor Obasi, if I can just merge this question with that. A lot of people have also argued that the private sector doing well is an indication of the dwindling fortunes of government spending on education. And I'll give you an instance. A lot of people say, even in primary schools, I think PwC did a study recently that says about 80% of the starter schools in Lagos are private schools. 80% of people attend private schools over public schools. But in a country, a sharp contrast like Rwanda, you have private schools shutting down and people going to government schools. So let's just juxtapose those two questions and we'll see your reaction to that, Professor Isaac Obasi.
Barrage of questions. I accept that point. First, let's underscore the point that some private universities are doing well. There's no doubt about it. It has nothing to do with public universities. I know that early days, the Academic Staff Union accused, rightly anyway, the former presidents of underdeveloping public universities and then paying emphasis on private. For instance, you have Bell there, associated with President Obasanjo. You have American University of Nigeria in Yola by the former vice president. Name them. There are many of them. The argument is that really the private universities are developing at the expense of public universities. I take a different view, even though in totality we can say yes, the bourgeoisie, the exploiters, the capitalist class, their preoccupation or modus operandi is to siphon public funds for private purpose. Yes, at the general level, we agree on that. But there are certain instances where institutions should be autonomous in such a way that they can do certain things and show that they really want to develop, not to blame government at all the time. Let me restate my statement. The private university system has been struggling and started with in 1999. I have a book on private university published in 2009 in Germany. And that book x-rayed the nearly 10 years of existence of private universities in Nigeria.
Okay.
The way they are growing, it does not necessarily mean that government
Professor,
is not.
I do apologize, but I have to interrupt your line of thought because we have to go for a quick break. I'll be right back to discuss some more. Stay with us.
Okay.
Glad to have you back, everyone. You're still watching the Morning Show here on Arise News. We're taking a review of Nigeria's education sector in the year 2019. Professor Isaac Obasi of the University of Abuja is doing justice to that topic. Thank you, Professor, for staying with us. Before that break, you were trying to draw a parallel between the development in the private institutions and the public. You want to land on that thought before I ask you my next question?
Audio problem?
Professor Obasi, if you can hear me, I was just saying you should land on your thoughts before the break. You were talking about the disparities in the public and private universities in Nigeria.
Yes. Yeah, the point I was making is that to blame just that private universities thriving because of neglect of public universities is a lame excuse. The TED Fund is not giving any assistance to private universities. And in some other countries, even in nearby Ghana and some other African countries, equivalent of TED Fund agency is giving assistance to private universities. Private universities generate funds. They give employment. They do all sorts of things that infant industries do and attract, even tobacco industries that are harmful to our health, we are told. Receive tax holidays. So none is extended to private universities, and they are doing well by their own, dint of hard work. So federal government should do well, fund its own universities, and make sure that it does what it promises it says it will do. For instance, the MOU signed by federal government and the ASU in 2013, government did not keep to its promise. We passed 2018 last year. By that MOU, government should have been given from 2014 220 billion every year for that 5 years. They didn't do it, and 2018 is gone. So by now we should be talking about how do we, resuscitate the university system based on that needs analysis. Because you don't go about doing another needs analysis when the one done rightly and properly done has not been done. So I am saying that the competition that exists between private and public universities should continue. It is healthy. And nobody should use lame excuse and said public universities are doing well, private universities are doing well because the government is supporting them. Which kind of support? No support is given to them. In actual fact, they have to meet the 14 criteria required by NUC for them to be given a license, accreditation and license first to exist. So government should do well. The government should first fund its institutions very well.
Okay, Professor, I have two questions for you, actually, since you've brought up the relationship between the universities and government. 2019, like many other years, saw major unions in the education sector down in tools. ASU, for instance, began this year, 2019, with an industrial action that lasted several weeks. How can we buck this trend of associations in the sector down in tools? What can we do differently going into 2020? And secondly, another thorny issue, and I'm sure you've been following, is the issue of the IPs, the Integrated Personal Information Registration for tertiary education workers in Nigeria. Is ASU averse to transparency? What's your thought?
Okay, that's the first leg of your question. What can we do differently? Like I ended up by saying that if, for instance, the federal government honored its MOU, by injecting in the system 220 billion every year from 2014 to 2018, a lot would have been achieved. Much of the issue, the strike we had last year, for instance, that enabled us to start this 2019 with being on strike, wouldn't have occurred. So that aspect, government should do things differently. On the issue of IPs, I want to excuse myself. I share a different opinion because having been a reform consultant to federal government over the years and worked also on IPs and saw how wonderfully it is to promote transparency and accountability in the system, I have my own view as a professional. I'm driven here by knowledge. So I may share a different view, which I don't think it will be fair to come and publicly say this with ASU and federal government.
Right, Professor Obasi, we got that, and we know, where you pretty much stand on issues like this. But what I was talking was about primary education, and I think you got the question wrong. What I was talking was about primary education the last time, and I'll ask that question. I'll also ask another question relating to universities. That question was, you see what's happening in Rwanda. The trend is that private primary schools are shutting down in Rwanda, and people prefer to put their children in government primary schools. Are there any learnings we can take from that? How can we make that be our lot in Nigeria? And secondly, we all know that government cannot adequately provide all the funding the university system needs. And I say this because I have spoken to the best universities in the world, and I know that what they use as a deal breaker for them is something called the endowment fund. The endowment fund of St. John's College in Oxford alone is a sizable portion of Nigeria's budgets, even almost as bigger than the budget of Sierra Leone. Is endowment fund something we should start looking at to be able to, bridge the funding shortfall? Two questions, sir. Yeah, good. I get your Rwanda question very well, and I'm pleased to
to say, yes, you are correct by what you said about what I said. Now, what you said is correct. My understanding from what I heard you now is absolutely very correct that private schools are shutting down because the public schools are doing well. People now see the reason to migrate to public schools, which is the reverse in our own country. What does that show? It means that government has paid enough attention to public schools, upgraded the status that can compete very favorably, that will attract middle-class income guys to send their children to that school. Yes, in this country, we have semblance of such. Governor El-Rufai of Kaduna State sent his child to a public school. And even though people criticize that he first of all innovated that school before sending his child, but that's where to start. Let them start innovating public schools, make them very good for learning, promote good learning environment, and at the end of the day, that will definitely make people to go back to public schools. That's number one. Are we together?
Yes, we are together. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, very good, very good. That's number one. So you are correct. We should improve public schools to make it attractive for people to send their children there. That's correct. Secondly, the second one you thought, it's been there. There is a scale of endowment. The endowment thing has been there, my dear. Through alumni too, it's been there. Friends of universities, kind of things that have been there. Humanitarian guys, philanthropists, all those things are the scale of it in this country is still low. I do know you made very important point about that endowment, the history of it. I do know, and let me say that in 2006, for instance, when I was in a fellowship in State University of New York in Buffalo, and when I mentioned that private universities will succeed in this country, they said no. Why? They said there's no culture of endowment in this country. Critically, they were correct, but I told them, look, some of these private universities, about that time, the faith-based universities were higher in number and percentage. I told them, look at the faith-based. They are the ones controlling the private investment system in this country. So they have sustainability prospects. The argument was that there was no sustainability for this country, these private universities. They would die in about 5 years' time. Today, we are over 10 years of private universities in this country. That's what we are now, 10 years indeed. So you can see that they survived that. The point I'm making, endowment is important. And I pointed to them that whether it is Harvard, name them in US. Is it not private endowment through and also faith-based university that they started and they made it? So that trajectory is good for us in funding. And this is where the autonomy of universities should be taken seriously. Autonomy package should be seen for what it is. And the universities themselves should be inward and use even the one given to them, the autonomy given to them, convert it into meaningful and viable sources of income. For me now, I think some universities are trying, others are still lazy, thinking that federal government is Father Christmas that come and brush their teeth for them. No. There's some level of autonomy in the university now that can enable us to do a lot and generate our funds. But some universities generate it and filter it away. That we know. And that's why at times, as we say, let federal government call for visitation panel. These accountability mechanisms that exist that should be used to improve governance. I key into that position, that should be done. And if we generate a lot, we won't be blaming government all the time. Universities by nature and creation should not be wholeheartedly dependent on government. If they do, oh no, the system will suffer. Because autonomy model, the healthy autonomy model is the one that allows the universities and government to move on a constructive, collaborative relationship style that are not entirely confrontational, not entirely in silo, staying on their own. No, collaborative model will enable them to develop. But we have not achieved that in our system, and that itself is a problem.
Right. We'd like to just take on that a little bit and ask you, what are your prospects, real quickly as a roundup for the educational system in the year 2020? It's just a couple of hours around the corner. What are your prospects? What should be done differently in 2020 as a wrap-up?
government should redirect its, improve its priority. Let me make this point. If you shift emphasis on something, you give more attention to it, you give its priority. Government should give education high priority, as it has demonstrated now in UBE. It should be seen to have to show such concern at the tertiary level. Very, very important. Because it's at this level that you can have people who will be creative, innovative enough to help solve our problems. Let us not make mistake about it. If we do not really create the kind of university systems we need, developmental strides will not be easy to achieve. So government should improve and make sure it costs ASU very, very well. Let there be a harmonious, collaborative, relationship rather than this antagonistic model.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Obasi, for being on the show this morning. We really do appreciate, and have a wonderful new year.